Hey y'all, welcome back to Ghost and Glitter. My name's Rachel, and today I'm going to talk about the 24 books that I want to read in 2024. So this video is a little late to being posted. As per usual, the books I want to get to this year do lean more towards the horror side, but I do have a pretty decent conglomeration of horror, fantasy, sci-fi, and a little in-between stuff. So this is in no particular order. This is just kind of how I picked out the books and wrote them in my journal. So without further ado, here are the 24 books that I want to get to this year. First up is the final installment of one of my favorite trilogies of all time, and one of my most anticipated reads, and that is The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. So the first book being My Heart is a Chainsaw, second book being Don't Fear the Reaper, the third book that is coming out in March, I believe, is The Angel of Indian Lake, third and final installment of the Indian Lake trilogy. I am absolutely in love with this series, so it's no surprise that I'm going to be very quickly picking up the third book. I'm probably going to do a reread of these two just to get back into Jade's world. If you don't know, the Indian Lake trilogy follows our main character, Jade, who lives in Proof Rock, Idaho. The first book takes place when Jade is just graduating high school, and she starts seeing things going on in her hometown that makes her think a slasher is taking place. She's absolutely obsessed with slashers. There is tons of references to popular and also very obscure slashers in this book, and I absolutely adored it. And the second installment takes place 4 hours, almost said 4 hours, 4 years after My Heart is a Chainsaw, with the cleanup of Proof Rock after a slasher's taken place. And also there's an escaped serial killer that Jade and her friends have to go up against. Absolutely loved and devoured both of these books, and I expect nothing less from The Angel of Indian Lake. And I'm so sad that the trilogy's ending, but I think it's going to be perfectly rounded out because I don't see another option. I don't see an option except for greatness. So, super excited. The next book that I want to get to this year is kind of obscure, I feel like, because I haven't really talked about myself reading this series, but it is Criminal by Karin. This is like the 6th or 7th book in the Will Trent series, which is like a, what's it called? Police procedural, that's what it's called. Karin Slaughter, I'm just obsessed with her writing and her books. So last year I completed the Grant County series, which is like the series that takes place before the Will Trent series. And I've read a good bit into the Will Trent series and really enjoyed it, but I'm kind of doing a reread to pick myself back up there. But I want to keep going on with this series, and Criminal is the next book. I don't know what it's about. I just know that we're following Will Trent, who is a detective for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And then like the people in his life, kind of the reoccurring characters, Angie, who is a woman from his past that he has a complex relationship with, and Sarah, who is not new to the series, but is new to Will's life. And they also have a complicated relationship. So I'm just very invested in the characters, and also Karin Slaughter just knows how to weave a really intense thriller. There's always a lot of violence and stuff packed into these books, so if you haven't read Karin Slaughter, definitely check trigger warnings, proceed with care or caution, because she packs a lot into these books, but I absolutely eat them up. So just to make sure I stay on track, I want to read Criminal by Karin Slaughter. Next up is another anticipated new release for 2024, and that is the sequel to What Moves the Dead, called What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. When I read this book last year, I did not realize that it was going to be getting a sequel. I don't know if many people realized it was going to be getting a sequel, but it is. And the cover is just as beautiful as this, although I kind of like this one more. So What Moves the Dead is T. Kingfisher's retelling of the tale of the House of Usher. The fall of the House of Usher. And we're following our main character, Alex Easton, who is a retired soldier. This book wraps up very well. It doesn't set itself up for a sequel, and because this is a retelling, I don't really know what to expect from What Feast at Night. I don't know if we're getting another retelling. All I do know is we're following the same main character as we found in this book, and it's T. Kingfisher, and if you're new here, I love her writing. I'm obsessed with her, and I will read anything that she writes. So, of course, I'm going to be reading the sequel to this. The fourth book that I want to get to in 2024 is another new release. It hasn't come out yet, but it is another Stephen Graham Jones book, and that is I Was a Teenage Slasher. Once again, I don't know a lot about this book because it's an author that I am going to pick up and read no matter what. So I kind of just, I don't care what it's about. But I feel like the title describes it well enough, and that's all I need to know, honestly. Stephen Graham Jones and that title. The next book on my list is The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. I've only read one book by Sarah Waters and absolutely loved it. It was my favorite book, one of my favorite books of the year when I read it. And I just haven't read anything by her since, and I don't know why. So the book I picked is The Little Stranger. I've heard great things about this, as I have with most of her books. This, I think, leans more into gothic horror than her other books have. So it's my understanding that this is a post-World War I or II, I'm not positive, but it's a post-war novel, and we're following a doctor who is called to take care of a patient at this large estate, with a mother and her 2 children there, I believe, and just, it's a large house, weird things happen, and that's kind of all I know. It's supposed to be kind of haunting and gothic. And Sarah Waters, just from my one experience with her, has amazing character design and writes fantastic atmosphere. So I'm really excited to read another one of her books. Next on my must-read list for the year is is this number 7? Oh, no. This would be so much more satisfying if this was the 7th book on here, but it's the 6th. 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is a second chance romance about 2 authors who 15 years ago had like a just kind of summer fling and then left each other's lives. And I think I said they're both authors, and they kind of like write to each other in each other's books, I think. And then they meet unexpectedly at an event, and I'm thinking they're gonna give it another go. I've only heard good things about this, so I'm really excited to get to it. Next on the list is kind of a classic. That is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I own a decent amount of Michael Crichton books. I've read 0 Michael Crichton books, so I feel like I should probably start with what is arguably his most famous work. I love the movie, I love sci-fi, I love dinosaurs, so like, if this isn't a win for me, I'm just gonna stop for the rest of the year. I guess I should probably say what it's about. So, pretty famous novel, but if you don't know somehow what this is about, it is scientists have discovered dinosaur DNA and are using it to create more dinosaurs, and are gonna, like, they're hoping to open a theme park of dinosaurs, calling it Jurassic Park, and life finds a way. So the next book on my list is a poetry collection, actually, that I got, I believe, last year at an independent booksellers day. I don't know. I don't read a lot of poetry, but I do really enjoy poetry. So in an effort to force poetry into my life, this is on my 24 and 24. This is a women in horror poetry collection called Under Her Skin. The cover. Just look at the cover. She's gorgeous. The back is even gorgeous. Like, the cover. I don't really know what else to tell you. It's a women in horror poetry collection, and it's beautiful. Another horror book that is on my list, and hopefully, due to the size, I will definitely get through, is Below by Laurel Hightower. This, if you can't tell by the cover, is a Mothman book. While driving through the mountains of West Virginia during a late-night snowstorm, a recently divorced woman experiences bizarre electrical problems, leaving her with little choice but to place her trust with a charismatic truck driver. But when an unexplainable creature with haunting red eyes gets between them, she is forced to make one of the toughest decisions of her life. So, Mothman. The next book on my list, I'm a little nervous to read because I know a lot of people really deeply love this book, and there's a couple of books in my stack that are deeply loved. So if I don't end up loving them, I'm a little scared. But this is a literary dystopian novel that most people have probably heard of. That is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So there's a virus that causes the collapse of society. And this book takes place 20 years later, following Crichton, an actress in the Traveling Symphony, performing Shakespeare in the settlements that have grown up since the collapse. One thing that interests me about this is that it takes place in the early days after society collapses, and not like dystopian in the sense that the world has been like this for a very long time. This is just 20 years after society's collapse. So I believe it's a little more on the literary side. So I'm hoping to take my time with this and have a good time. The next book on my list is a sci-fi book called Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. This is the first book in a trilogy. I own the first 2 books and have almost purchased the third before I decided that I should probably make sure that I like this before getting the third book. So I'm very proud of myself for that one. But this just sounded so fascinating. A girl named Rose is riding her new bike near her home in Deadwood, South Dakota, when she falls through the earth and into the palm of a giant metal hand. 17 years later, the mystery of the bizarre artifact remains unsolved, its origins, architecture, and purpose unknown. Rose Franklin is now a highly trained physicist and is leading a top-secret team determined to crack the hand's code. I want to read this year, so I can determine if I want to get the next book. Well, I have the next book, but if I want to get the final book. The next book on this list is another beloved book. That is Circe by Madeline Miller. A lot of people love Madeline Miller. I have not read anything by her, so I own this, and I do enjoy Greek mythology and retellings, so it makes sense to read this. It is a retelling of the story of Circe, but more specifically, in the house of Helios, god of the sun and mightiest of the Titans, a daughter is born, but Circe is a strange child, not powerful like her father, nor viciously alluring like her mother. Turning to the world of mortals for companionship, she discovers that she does possess power, the power of witchcraft, which can transform rivals into monsters and menace the gods themselves. Threatened, Zeus banishes Circe to a deserted island where she hones her occult craft and crosses paths with many of the most famous figures in all of mythology, including the Minotaur, Daedalus, and his doomed son, Icarus, the murderous Medea, and of course, wily Odysseus. But there is danger too for a woman who stands alone, and Circe unwittingly draws the wrath of both men and gods, ultimately finding herself pitted against one of the most terrifying and vengeful of the Olympians. So, okay, I probably read too much there. But anyway, I really want to get to the, it's on my 24 and 24. Of course I really want to get to it. All right, next is another fantasy, and this is also very much beloved to the fantasy readers of BookTube. So it sounds great. I'm really excited to read it. I hope I love it. That is Jade City by Fonda Lee. This is described as an epic drama reminiscent of the best classic Hong Kong gangster films, but taking place in a fantasy metropolis. So, this has a magic system that utilizes jade, I believe. Well, if I read the back of the book, maybe. For centuries, honorable greenbone warriors have used magical jade to enhance their abilities and defend the island of Kikon from foreign invasion. Now the war is over, and a new generation vies for control of the bustling capital city. 4 siblings of the powerful Cole family must prepare for battle, and the fragile peace between the clans is about to break. What I'm hoping to get from this is complex character design. 4 siblings, so I'm hoping for some complex relationships and morally great characters. That is some of my favorite characters to read in general, especially in fantasy. Yeah. Okay, next up, I have this. This is 3 books in one. We're counting it as 3 because this is the edition that I have. This will be a reread for me. So this is the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer, which consists of Annihilation, Acceptance, that's the 3rd one, Authority, and Acceptance. Annihilation is the most famous book of the trilogy. It's the first book, so it's the one that most people have read, but it also has a movie that's based on it. The other 2 books, while the order does matter and while they do continue the story, they are disjointed for me in the best way possible. So a lot of people don't continue or are unsatisfied with this series. I, however, absolutely loved how odd this was, especially Annihilation. I loved the eco-horror, sci-fi, just crossovers that occurred in this book. And I want to reread them because it's been about 4 years now and I loved this and I want to experience it again. So if you don't know, wow, it's got some sun damage. I'm sorry. If you don't know, the first book, Annihilation, is we're following a biologist and I forget the other characters' professions, but we never learn their names. We just learn their professions. So it's basically these 4 women that are going to investigate this abnormality that has occurred on this one particular part of Earth. There has been many people investigating this and they either don't come back, they come back different in one way or another. So we are following yet another expedition to figure out what this natural anomaly is and what's going on. And I just, like I said, I enjoyed kind of the eco-horror sci-fi aspects of this. And for anyone interested in reading this book, know that really none of your questions get answered, but like for me in a good way, but for many in not a good way. So all that to say, I want to reread this. So this is 3 books. This is 1 book, but this is 3 books that I want to read. Okay? Okay. All right. Next on the list is another horror, which is Horns by Joe Hill. The only Joe Hill I've read is Lock and Key, which is a graphic novel series of about 6 volumes. I absolutely loved Lock and Key, but I haven't read one of his novels yet. This, I think his most famous is probably Nosferatu, which I do want to get to, but I own this, so I'm going to read this first, right? And it's also a lot shorter than Nosferatu. This is about a man whose partner has been murdered, and he is very reasonably grieving, but he finds that he is growing horns out of his noggin. So, yeah, I know they made a movie off of this with Daniel Radcliffe, which I plan on watching after I read this. I've heard that this is kind of like a romantic comedy. Not a romantic comedy. She's dead. It's like a horror romantic comedy. I don't know, something like that. I'll know more if I read it. The next book on here is kind of a light fantasy read. That is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Yet another author whose books that I gravitate towards, whose books I own, whose books I have never read. I'm going to start with this one because it's a standalone. All the other books I own by her are part of a series. So we're going to read the standalone. It's about a girl who makes a deal with the devil to live forever. I believe the stipulation is, however, that the people in her life will not remember who she is. So it is about Addie LaRue and her immortal life, or her invisible life, rather. Yeah, you know, books are a lot easier to tell you what they're about when you've read them. Next book on the list is the first in a quite expansive fantasy series. That is The Last Wish. I don't know how to pronounce this person's name. Fern's protecting me from the comfort of her fuzzy pad. The Last Wish. This is the first book in the Witcher series. Pretty popular series of books, pretty popular series of games, pretty popular series of TV shows. So I have watched the first couple of seasons of the show and really enjoyed it. This, I believe, is a collection of short stories, kind of a conglomeration, much like the first season of the show, to really get an idea of what kind of world we're living in. And then I believe the rest of the books are more just like straight up story. I'm wanting to read more fantasy. A friend of ours lent us the entire series. So I would be remiss not to take advantage of semi-owning the entire series. So we're gonna definitely read this year and hopefully continue this series this year. We have The Between by Tananarive Due. This is a queen of horror, and I say that having read only one of her books, but she has an amazing backlist that I want to get to, and this is just one of many of her acclaimed books that I want to read. So The Between is about our main character, Hilton, who was saved by his grandmother from drowning, but she ended up drowning, saving his life. And now that he has grown up, I believe he has like a wife and a kid, he starts believing that maybe he was supposed to have died then. This sounds amazing. I've only read, like I said, I've only read one book by Tananarive, and that was The Good House. And boy, did I absolutely freaking love that book. So I am so excited to continue reading her books and continue picking them up. The next book I have on here sadly doesn't have a dust jacket. It makes me very sad. But that is The Changeling by Victor Laval. I've only read one book by Victor Laval, and I absolutely loved it, and that was The Ballad of Black Tom. So in The Changeling, as much as I know, we are following our main character Apollo, who's when he was younger, his father left him, and now that he's grown up, he has a wife, and he is also a new father, but I believe he and his wife just are not connected to this baby. Like, this baby is just, there's a disconnect there, and then his wife does something that sets this whole book in motion, I think. The next book that I want to get to this year is Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. Last year, or the year before, I don't even remember anymore, I read his book, his debut book, Mary, and absolutely loved it. Nestlings is a lot smaller than Mary, but it's been described as Rosemary's Baby meets Salem's Lot. I don't really know a lot beyond that. I think it has to do with motherhood, which is usually not my kind of book that I go to. I'm excited because of the whole Rosemary's Baby and Salem's Lot description. So definitely want to get to that. Okay, the next book on the list is Rouge by Mona Awad. I've only read Bunny by her and absolutely loved it. So I was just excited, as every other bunny lover, about her coming out with another book. It has been described as a gothic fairy tale. Honestly, that's all I know. I don't have the book, or I would read a little bit of the synopsis to you. Just because of the author and that description alone, I really want to get to it this year. And the final book on my list is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This came out last year, I believe, and I just didn't get to it, but now that people have like chilled out a little bit, my library actually has copies that aren't a forever wait. So this is a departure from R.F. Kuang's previous writings. It is a contemporary book about this author who learns of another author's manuscript, and then that other author is tragically killed, and so our main character just kind of adopts the manuscript as her own and pretends it's her own. And it's about like the publishing industry. It's about the publishing industry. It's about the publishing industry. It's about racism, white privilege, and the main character is one that you hate. I love reading from the perspective of like a main character that you hate. It sounds so fun. So, well, not so fun, but you know. That is the 24 books that I want to read in 2024. I'm hoping that since most of these I own physically, that I do actually get to this. But we shall see. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, week, what have you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also follow me over on Instagram or friend me on Goodreads. And I will see y'all in my next video. Bye!